An extra copy?
Parish 2020. Just parish.
Mine's an uppercase.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order our March 9th, 2020 strategic planning meeting. Let's see, roll call, Madam Secretary, and it looks like we're all here. And Chairwoman Casso is also joining us tonight. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to the invocation, Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody stand, please.
Good evening, everyone. Please prepare yourselves for prayer. Lord God, we thank you for this wonderful day in Ascension Parish. You have guided us with your wisdom and with your love, and we ask that you continue to guide us with your wisdom and your love as we move forward doing your work here on earth. We have a number of important matters this evening. Lord, please stay with each of us while we decide what is best for the folks of Ascension Parish, and as we move forward, we ask for your guidance, Lord Jesus. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, on to item number 3, chairs additions. There are no chairs additions tonight. We'd like to move on to item number 4, the public comment period. If anyone would like to speak on anything on our agenda tonight, please, there are some green, red, and white cards at the podium. Please fill them out and give them to Miss Jessica right here. All right, and with that, moving on, we'll go ahead and get into it. General business number 5A. We are going to have a presentation by the administration on policy changes to bridges, bulkheads, and culvert repair maintenance in the parish. President Quintmore.
Yeah, so we don't actually have a presentation. We just wanted to take item per item for discussion.
Okay.
Just to open it up and talk a little bit about policies and procedures and things of the past and how they were handled and how we would like to proceed as far as the council and administration moving forward with the legal liability and the cost of each. If you'd like, Chair, we'll start with bridges.
Okay. Good.
Right, so we have a number of off-road bridges, so outside of public right-of-ways. These will be private bridges on private land that some we utilize and some we do not. So oftentimes we have citizens call in and ask us if we would rebuild their bridges and at the cost of the parish. Now, sometimes these have benefit to drainage, sometimes they don't, but we need to discuss a policy and procedure moving forward because this has been handled differently from administration to administration and so on and so forth in history. So what we're possibly proposing as an option would be to identify all bridges that are utilized by the parish for maintenance, drainage, get a good solid list. In doing so, requiring servitude to those bridges, servitude across those bridges for maintenance purposes, and therefore we also need a system of whenever a request is done, that a study is done to ensure that there is a greater public benefit than a private benefit in relationship to that bridge. And looking at those different circumstances, that will allow us to therefore abandon all other bridges that we do not use for maintenance and that are strictly privately owned. Now, we would have to do a case-by-case basis on bridges that are existing that may obstruct drainage. And then those bridges would be looked at on a case-by-case basis specifically related to that. But we're proposing to generate a list of bridges we use for drainage maintenance purposes that we have access to, and if we don't get access to, in our normal maintenance routines of cutting grass, dredging, and cleaning off-road ditches. I'll be happy to answer any questions related to that topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. President. We should have just about all bridges identified that we are using to cross, to do any type of maintenance. At one time, it was over 400-something bridges that we were, dealing with. And I know there's some out there that, we're not using, and some of them, we have been removing them. When we go in and change a channel, enlarge a channel, we doing some serious erosion to some of the bridges that we have out there now. And, I think we need to look at it, like you say, from both sides of this, but, we have some bridges right now in very bad shape, and, due to, even installing the box covers that we're putting in, it puts a heavier flow on some of the down, bridges that are further down the system that's really tearing them up, so, I'm all for looking at, some changes here. The policy that we have, no one up here has been to jail, or we've had quite a few Attorney General opinions, and I'm talking from 16 years. I was one of the first ones on the bridge committee, so we have changed a lot. But we 3 months in now, and we have some stuff we need to really start tending to, because the people are calling, and it's affecting all districts. So whatever we have to do to move forward tonight, or at least the policy that we have, move forward with it and look at these changes at drainage, or however y'all want to work it, but we have to move very quickly on this. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Ogeron.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, you're saying you want to look at these bridges on a case-by-case basis? Can you help us kind of define what you're looking for, or what stipulations, what issues are you going to look for to establish that case-by-case basis?
Yeah, it's actually two parts. So
Okay.
first part is an identification list of bridges we actually use. I have yet to see a list that has been identified for all bridges that we use for access or crossing over for maintenance. So I don't believe that exists. If it does, I have not found it yet.
Sure.
So that list needs to be created first. And then second, let's say that we have a private bridge that was put in that may be too low. It may be causing a drainage impediment. Well, then that has to be looked at on that particular basis. Now, in that particular case, we would have to have a process of engineering review or some type of internal review, so that the AG's opinion, which basically states that it has to be greater than 50% public, public positive in relationship to private in order to use public funds. And so I would think that that has to be identified, that that benefit exceeds 50% before we spend public money. So the first part is create the list of all the bridges we utilize, have that list so that we are responsible for their maintenance. Then the second part is whether it's bridges or other items that cause obstruction, identify those, and whether we have to remove them completely or rebuild them to where they're at a sufficient height or elevation for adequate water to flow underneath so it doesn't impede drainage flow.
Okay. How long do you think it would take the administration to accumulate that list?
I would have to talk to Ron and the staff there. I think that they have a good general idea base. We'd have to get with the GIS department. and to establish that. Now, the acquiring of right-of-way to those structures may take a little while. So, for example, we would have to go to the owner and say, hey, look, we don't have appropriate right-of-way to get to this bridge. We're currently using it, but we need it in writing. If you want us to maintain it, then we need the correct right-of-way, and we need a map done so that we have that forever and it's set in stone. And then, at that point, we will take responsibility for the maintenance and any repairs to that bridge.
So if I understand correctly, you're wanting to establish at least first the process of identifying these bridges, making a listing of which ones we can use, which ones are compliant, which ones are beneficial, and then you're going to come back to the council for the next stage of your process of evaluation and review?
Correct. Now, if
Right.
there's any bridges that may need immediate attention, let's figure out the process of verification of public to private benefit, and then identify that, whatever technique that is, to ensure that we're complying with over 50% public benefit. And therefore, we're ready to proceed on those immediately based on that need.
Well,
We can move on those soon.
just from my point of view, I would appreciate seeing that list first.
Okay,
I think seeing the list first would give us an idea of the magnitude and the scope of the work that we're going to be addressing. And then from there, we can move forward with taking the steps necessary to repair, replace. If that's something that you would be in
Yeah.
agreement of, I would be supportive of that.
absolutely. The list is first and foremost, creation of that list. And we would have to work with each of y'all to identify what y'all know of in your districts of bridges that are being utilized, and with y'all's assistant, to help create this list of, like, because nobody knows their districts better than y'all.
I'll quote you on that last comment, sir.
Yes, Ms. Casso.
So I'd like to address the public-private benefit and the mention of the need for a study to determine that. So who would be responsible, in your mind, as you're thinking about it now, who would be responsible for the cost of that study?
That has not been addressed, and it's certainly a good question, a great question.
So that's something we'll certainly need to
We need to
understand.
address, absolutely.
And okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Cagney.
Also, I agree with what Dempsey said. You know, it's my second term, but I've heard historically there have been numerous studies of the bridges in Ascension Parish, you know, good, bad, and otherwise, over a number of years. So that data it's somewhere. So I would encourage you, Mr. President, to just look into that and see what you might be able to get from that. And
Absolutely. Yes.
as an initial investigation. Thank you.
Okay, I do have one question, and mine's kind of on the far-fetched spectrum of things. But with all of the bridges that we have on our parish roads, do we think there's many scenarios to where we can't get to the land on our right-of-way, on our bayou banks and all that stuff without the use of any private bridges?
The answer is yes. I don't know if we have a complete list at this time of all drainage servitudes that we require or have. What I would like to do is identify all drainage servitudes, map that on the GIS, look where we need to acquire to link all these access drainage servitudes together, and go out and get the appropriate drainage servitudes. I don't know if we have even enough servitude on all our off-road ditches to grant access. We've been granted verbally in the past. We've been granted for need, like we got obstructions that need to be tree fall in the ditch. The owner call, give us access at that point, but nothing ever written down. So we need to compile not only a list of our bridges, but a list of our drainage servitudes as well. Hook that into the GIS system, identify the bridges on the GIS system, identify the drainage servitudes on the GIS system, and then linking all that together to put the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together so we ensure that we have proper access for maintenance, and then identify the bridges that we will be 100% responsible for because of use, and then the other ones be on case-by-case basis outside of the list.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's feasible anywhere in in the future to where we get out of the private bridge business altogether. If we can do what we have to do with our right of way off of our parish roads, get to the areas we need to get to.
Yeah, let's just use, for example, let's say we travel 500 yards on one side of a canal bank and we need to cross, and we're using a private bridge to do so. Instead of having to turn around, go 500 yards back, hit the public roadway, then get back on the other side, we're utilizing that bridge to save time and money. And so that would be a bridge that we would want to put on the list, acquire access to and over, to ensure that we have access at all times. And once we do that, once we put it into the system, there's never a question of whether we do or we don't.
Okay. Any other questions? Any
Very good.
comments? Yeah. Okay.
The next one will be bulkheads, similar but different. So currently, an owner will come to us and they will present a proposal for us to pay for materials up to $7,500 for bulkhead materials, and then they will install the bulkhead. So we don't know if there's a benefit or not. That has been studied again. And the cost associated, we don't know, we have to discuss. So what we're proposing is that a owner would come to us, propose this. They would need to provide us with a detailed map or engineering study of where the bulkhead will be placed to ensure that, first of all, it doesn't impede drainage. Second of all, that it is a benefit, well, whether it be placed at the top bank, and then opposite, if it was placed at the water's edge, it would reduce capacity, therefore would not be a benefit. We would need to review that. Also, we require Corps to determine wetlands on subdivisions. We currently, on tonight's agenda, going to pay for wetland mitigation along New River, or propose to pay. Y'all will have to agree to that. These do not require any wetlands study, so we would prefer that the owner at least have that done, so that we're not take a part in it in any kind of way. And then, once they provide that information to us, we determine benefit, and we determine that they adhere to all federal and state regulations, and then we would proceed to give them the purchase material, and then they would come and build the bulkhead per specs that we approved. So if there are any questions about that.
Currently, right now, we just, we help them with the 700 material, and they build it however they feel fit. No permitting, no procedure, no anything. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Robert?
So you're saying currently it doesn't have to be mitigated for a bulkhead, or currently the administration doesn't mitigate it?
There's no process for the owner to mitigate or look to see if there is wetlands to mitigate. For example, the wetlands on New River are right along the water's edge, and that's what we're mitigating. We're paying a considerable amount of money, and you'll see that tonight. That process is not put into these bulkheads or anything else. And so I think they would have the same requirement as we have, and when we do maintenance along a river edge or body, that they would be held to the same requirements. And so I would like to see that they either have addressed them or they have no wetland mitigation in this process.
And the only reason I even say that is because when you get into mitigating wetlands and you start that process, that's a huge process that needs to be addressed, and they need to understand that needs to be addressed way beforehand.
Absolutely. We'll fill out a permit pamphlet, and it'll list the items that they need to have in order to submit to us for us to buy the material. So they would know in advance, when they come apply, all the requirements necessary to get to that point.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms. Canalati.
Mr. President, my experience in the past, when I've dealt with bulkheads and had a few done in my district over the past 4 years, it's not a drainage issue. It's not really a flood. It's an erosion. You know, it's their bayou bank or river bank. It just is eroding, and they're losing their property. So an engineering study might help flooding mitigation if that's required, but in most cases, they're just trying to preserve their yard or their property. And a visual inspection by our people, they went and looked at it and said, okay, it's real. They have an erosion problem, so they measured it up, got the estimate on materials, provided materials, and then the citizen or constituent hired a contractor and they installed the bulkhead. I don't know that I don't know, Dempsey, your drainage, have you ever heard of one that required a bulkhead installment that required mitigation? I'm just curious.
That's the first time I've heard of it. And it's, just to add to it,
That's to say, not to say it wouldn't happen, but
yeah, and most of the problems that we have, and I know Ron has a list of them, it's where we have the pumping stations that we really, we end up losing them one way or the other because of the volume of the water that's coming through with the pump stations. But, definitely an engineering study would, it's gonna help down the road, so. What that's gonna cost on top of, what else they have here with the installation, that's gonna be the thing.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Ogeron.
Following up with Councilman Lambert, the cost-benefit analysis of going through with an engineering study ahead of time, would you give any thought to the possibility of restricting the necessity for this engineering study in cases of exigency, the homeowner's ability to pay, the costs? Because I can see an engineering study costing a homeowner $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, to get this accomplished, to put forth a $7,000 bulkhead or an $8,000 bulkhead. So now you've just increased the cost by 50% for someone that really can't afford to do that. So, would you consider putting some options in your process that would consider those technicalities?
We would certainly look at how you would want to vary that. I think the most important thing is location of bulkhead. Even though it is a erosion type, save my property type deal, if we take the Amite River Diversion Canal, those are required to have Corps permitting, and those are drawings and everything else along those water bodies to ensure that they don't extend out too far or back, that they're all in line with each other. We don't currently do that. So my fear is without some type of drawing or study of where it's actually put, and I probably should have had a drawing of this, but when you go down from Top Bank and you go down to Water's Edge, if you put that bulkhead at Water's Edge, you have reduced capacity of all that slope. And we have no system to determine whether they're doing that or not. Once we pay them, give them the materials, they go put it where they want. And so that is a real concern on our end from the drainage standpoint of reduction of capacity based on where they put the bulkhead. And so now, if they put it at the top bank and remove that slope and throw it on the back, throw that spoil on the back side of that, well, that would create that capacity. It would prove that there's no obstruction to flow. And then that would allow us to say, okay, that has a benefit, and we're willing to put the $7,500 forward for material. And then that would satisfy those two requirements. One, it doesn't impede drainage, and two, that there's a public benefit greater than 50%. And so I don't know how you do that without a study or a drawing or some kind of mechanism to put in place to ensure that that is required and happens correctly and is installed correctly.
And I think maybe the questions that we're getting from up here are the apples and orange type questions. What you just indicated, is valid. I see the concerns there. When I'm thinking of a bulkhead mitigation project for a homeowner, I'm not visualizing, because my district, I'm not visualizing New River or the Amite River or something to that effect. I'm thinking of folks who live along a little creek, or there's a little drainage canal that's causing erosion on the property. And I'm thinking that maybe we need to consider some sectionalism, in this process so that we can treat apples as apples and oranges as oranges. instead of trying to lump them all together and turn them into pineapples.
Yeah, we do riprap. So Councilman Lawler and his district, we've done some riprap along Muddy Creek, and so we continue to do that program
Good.
to ensure to stop that. And then I think there just needs to be a continual push by all of us to keep riprapping these things so they don't erode and those type situations along creeks. Now, as Councilman Lambert identified, ones that I would say prove that we are causing from turning on pumps, in my personal opinion, I think that we have caused damage, that not only should we pay for material, we should pay for installation. So those particular circumstances where it's proven that we have caused a problem due to flow, due to the volume and speed, then I would think that is our responsibility and duty to bulkhead those ourselves and from material to installation, in my opinion.
Good discussion.
And just to add, a personal opinion of mine is I would like to see our bulkhead program basically limited to the Marvinboro Pump Station water basin to ensure that we're not on Amite River and Diversion Canal putting down thousands and thousands of dollars of bulkhead that's natural. We're not causing that. We didn't. The Marvinboro Pump Station we put there. We pull on these bayous and canals very heavily in storm events and whatnot. And I would like to see us just talk about and entertain limiting our bulkhead program. Black Bayou, New River, Severio, all of our main drainage arteries that Marvinboro Pump Station is actually pulling on.
Yeah, you'd want to add Henderson, and you
No,
would add
right,
Cerrito as
right.
well.
Yeah, please.
But,
Yes, absolutely.
That's
Henderson
a discussion
Bayou.
for y'all. That's not,
Yeah,
if y'all would like to limit that, that's.
I would prefer to keep Amite and Diversion out of our program. I mean,
Strictly up to you.
right.
I mean, I don't know about diversion, because, I mean, if they're part of the parish, then why shouldn't they be involved in the program? Because I have constituents on diversion, and it's not,
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I understand.
and it's in the sense of, if they prove it's a benefit, it's a benefit, I don't think we should not have them, be eligible for the program.
And so I guess now would be a good time to bring up that maybe this is a good time for us to actually start considering an ordinance on these topics, and we can spend time, get together. That way, in 4 years, the next council and the next administration isn't having the same exact conversation. Yes, Ms. Terry.
Well, I would caution that the Drainage Board needs to address these issues.
No, I'm not talking about this body. I'm
Right.
talking about in general, or Drainage Commission. Wherever we want to, originate that from is fine. But we don't have a ordinance on this, and I think it'd be a good time to, start considering.
Certainly, the administration could propose an ordinance to the Drainage Department,
Well, it'd be
to the
a
Drainage Board.
It'd be a policy to drainage. They can't pass ordinances in
Okay,
drainage.
so correct.
That's right.
But
Yeah, I
it-
mean, you could do policy and drainage backed up with an ordinance per the council.
Right.
Yes.
And that would lock it in to say, okay, the ordinance adheres to this list, and this list has to be amended by ordinance or whatever. I mean, you'd have to
Right, like that,
could do
yes.
that, yes.
But the policy on what to do is a drainage board, because we're spending drainage board money, so we've got to
Correct.
do drainage board policies.
All right. Anybody else? Any?
So my recommendation certainly would be that we defer this to Drainage and for work with the administration on an ordinance that would, or on a policy that would be supported by an ordinance at the council as a recommendation from Drainage.
Okay. All right. So,
One more.
yeah. Go ahead.
Culverts.
Huh?
Still got the culverts to deal with.
Right. Okay.
All right, so,
We still got one more.
all right, so these are culverts that are not within the public road right-of-ways. These are culverts that are in drainage servitude in the back of subdivisions. These are culverts that have been covered that are in the middle of yards, those type of things. So at one point in time, we had an open ditch. The owner, and these would identify the ones that we haven't installed ourselves. The owner has paid to have culverts put in and drop inlets. and we gave them the specifications, they paid for it, they made the improvements. Oftentimes in the past, they put in metal. Metal has corroded and rusted, and now for us creating sinkholes and problems. So, there's a ton of these throughout the parish, a lot. So, the comparison of taking care of all of them is an extreme amount of money. So, what the administration is proposing as an option, this is for y'all to decide, is that if the owner would like us to come and fix them, then we provide the option of returning it to an open ditch as it once was when it was created. If they would like to fix it, then we allow them to have the permit to do so. This is a very tricky one, because what you decide on this one is going to set precedent that is going to reverberate for a long time and cost a tremendous amount of money. So this is one you want to discuss fully and in detail of the cost associated with and the process of what you decide here on ditches that have been covered up and have drop inlets.
Mr. Robey. Oh,
What if the constituents are willing to provide the culvert with the parish, meeting whichever new specifications and guidelines that they will last, would the parish be willing to install those culverts for them?
All right, so let's take a driveway. Okay, we currently, from my knowledge, we don't install driveway culverts. We tell them the size that's required, they go buy it and they install it. So now you're talking about installing something on a whole separate deal when we don't even do driveways. So we tell them the specifications, the elevations required, and then they set them and do it. So you're talking about extending something that we don't even do for driveways. So just to kind of give you a comparison of what we're doing in home building and everything else. So they used to buy the culvert, we would set it, and then, but we don't, to my knowledge, we don't even do that anymore.
What happens if they don't want to have an open ditch?
Then they can pay to have it fixed, like they did the original time when they placed it and covered the open ditch. But if they wanted us to spend money, we return it to its original state and take it out, and then we would have to fix the driveway, of course, and fix that part. But we would do that in the process of returning it to its original state.
Mr. Ojon.
Mr. President, do you have estimated costs or estimated monies that we spend annually in this particular project? I mean, are we talking in the tens of millions or tens of thousands?
I don't think that we do this. I don't know of cases, and we may have had some select few. First of all, I don't have a list, but I can ask, see if I can obtain one. I don't think that we've done this in the past that I know of. And we may have some isolated cases where we may have gone and done sinkholes associated with these, where we fill in sinkholes. We do have not a department, but a group of workers who do just that. They fill in
Right.
sinkholes, and that's from pipes that weren't put in correctly by the private owners, they weren't sealed correctly, and weren't done correctly, and then that water gets out of that pipe or it erodes from the bottom, and it circulates, and then all of a sudden we have a sinkhole. And so we do quite a bit of sinkholes. That's on a regular basis.
Are the sinkholes part of the project that you're trying to eliminate, or?
No, I think we're going to end up just doing sinkholes for a long time. I don't
Okay.
know how we can put a stop to that. That's just service we provide. It's a danger. Kids could fall in it. That's just something we have to provide, in my opinion. But no, this is strictly with replacing culverted ditches that maybe have an issue or problem that the owners are asking us to replace.
So if we're not doing it currently, or we're doing it on very limited basis currently, I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the necessity of going forward with the expense of putting a process together to eliminate something that we're currently not doing.
Because it's been asked and it's come up. recently.
Okay. Again, forgive me,
It's okay.
I'm new here, you know? So I guess I'm trying to figure out if we don't have a policy in place that says we're going to replace these culverts, we want to create a policy that says we're not going to replace culverts?
That we have a system of when this comes up, because the sinkholes are proven that now that all these metal pipes that were put in for decades are now rusting and deteriorating. So this is going to be a continuous problem moving forward. And so we're just, as an administration, trying to get ahead of it, establish policy and procedure, so that when they call and say, I put in a work order for you to come and fix my ditch that has been filled up and with drop inlets, that, no, sorry, here's our procedure and policy. We can return it to its open state as it originally was, but we can't go in and fix it, and you can go in and fix it,
Okay.
just like you installed it.
Okay,
But
so we
we're not gonna be
currently don't have a
responsible.
policy that says we're doing this?
No.
Okay, good, okay. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to clarify that. Appreciate it.
Well, then, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to add back, I know it was 2 or 3 years ago, Ms. Lolo Jones stood up in front of us here, and just like the parish president saying, these are rear ditches that were covered and in between homes. You know, there is a thing that we contracted out. You can reline these culverts that are already in the ground and seal your problem. But it goes back as case by case, and like you said, in the rear of the home, this is a total different from dealing in the front of the houses on side. So it's a couple of things that you can go back and pull and see, you know, where we were doing this stuff, and it really helps. And let's face it, we don't want to create more mosquitoes than we have to here with open ditches. And going back, I know we said metal covers, but metal covers, we permitted, we let people put metal covers in, and we put metal covers in years ago. Now we need some type of, you know, like you say, plastic, or we have to have some kind of coating on them. So this is going to be a long process, but there are answers out there that we can get this fixed, get some of this fixed. So thank you for listening.
Ms. Robert?
And as far as the process of setting it back to an open, installing a culvert, I mean, relatively, is there a big difference in how much work is involved, or totally? You know, I mean, are we looking?
If you don't mind,
Yeah, I just see Mr. Ron Savoy walked in. Would you like to comment?
There we go. Yeah, look, I think what President Clinton has brought up is a scenario, one scenario of an issue that comes up with culverts. And it's not just in the rear, it is along the front, along the road frontages as well. Some culverts, some subdivisions were designed curb and gutter. Well, some of them were not. So the ones that were not, sometimes people go in and cover their ditches. And what we're seeing is exactly what President is saying, is those metal pipes are deteriorating, causing sinkholes in those yards and backyards and whatnot. Same exact thing he's just said. But there's also subdivisions that were designed curb and gutter with rear ditches that were designed to be covered. So they don't have a ditch, they have piping under the ground. As it was approved by the Planning Commission and designed, those subdivisions that have those, that's what those crews that repair sinkholes maintain, is subdivisions that were designed with pipes in rear yards and front yards. Those ones that were designed that way, we have to maintain that infrastructure. But the ones that we're having these issues with, and what we need a policy to make us consistent in our response to the residents, is the ones that were not permitted with culvert and gutters. So we're having requests come in from residents saying, look, I've got sinkholes in my front yard, can you guys come repair my pipe? Well, in reality, it's really not a drainage issue. We do go out, like we say, and respond with the sinkhole crew and try to mend things as much as possible for public safety. But in reality, the drainage pipe or the drainage issue is not the root cause of the complaint. It's about my pipe in my front yard needs to be addressed. So we have that need to identify that, and as President said, the budgets on this could go really, really high if we start assuming the responsibility of all of these complaints in that particular scenario.
So what is the difference between changing out a culvert if they provide the culvert and returning it to an open state ditch as far as the cost?
Well, I think either way, we're saying that,
I mean, if they cost the same and we provide a culvert or they provide a culvert, why not let them put a culvert down if we're putting the same manpower and we're putting the same labor in?
well, you would lose the amount of work orders that you would have to respond to if the resident would do all of the work. In other words, if they go in and assume the responsibility of digging all of this up, the drainage department wouldn't assume the work
Well,
order
I'm talking about
response.
the instances that the president's talking about, where we are going and offering, hey, we will return it to open state ditch. I'm just saying if it costs the same and they want to provide whichever particular culvert, have it delivered on site, I mean, I think, why not?
Yeah, can I get you a cost difference? Can
Yes.
I answer that?
Yeah,
Then
absolutely.
that way I can go ahead and email the entire council so that we'll have that information for when it goes to drainage.
Yeah,
And that's the
absolutely.
reason why it's just a great opportunity to have this on strategic, so we can brainstorm a little bit, get a lot of these questions out, so when we go to the drainage board, we can have a lot more information, so.
And also, with the cost, I would guess that a large portion of the cost when resetting a culvert would be getting it back in the catch basin, sealing that up. And then and then as soon as you set it, you immediately got to fill it up with, put your dirt on the top. If not, first hard rain, that culvert will, kind of rainbow up on you. It'll float up. So, anything else? Anybody? All right. Anything else? Ron, President Quimble?
No, and what we'd also like to do, and as Ron was speaking, I would like to go ahead and create a list of all subdivision enclosed ditches that have been approved that way that we're responsible for. And therefore, there will be no question moving forward of whether it is or it isn't. And that way, we'll have a list dedicated to what we're responsible for subdivisions that were approved, closed ditch with curb and gutter, and so on and so forth. So that we'll have that. I think that would be helpful moving forward in identification of different scenarios and ones that we're responsible for and ones we're not.
All right. So that works. So,
We clear, Mr. Chairman, on bridge, bulkhead, and culvert policy.
yeah, if anybody else doesn't have any comment, I'm assuming, President Quimble, that y'all would like to gather information and questions from tonight and start to put a procedure together to bring back.
We'd like to go ahead and, at this point, I think that we've had enough discussion that know where we're headed. Let's go ahead and send it to drainage.
Okay.
The drainage meeting from this point.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Good deal. All right, we're going to be moving on to, I'm sorry, let me get my agenda back up. 5B. Well, we would be talking about discussion and approval of revisions to the Unified Land Development Code, Appendix 5, drainage. And just to give a quick overview, so our field ordinance, as we call it, was passed September 2019. It was a really great start. A lot of great things in there. It is a living document. We can always make adjustments and approve it where it be. Being in Santa Maria, of course, one of the lowest lying areas of the parish, started to just kind of run into a few issues that were kind of in the gray area, not a whole lot of black and white, kind of open-ended for discussion, and a few other things that have come as hardships to potential constituents, wanting to move in the area, or landowners wanting to build and buy a modular or mobile home, whatnot, on their land. If I'll tell you what, if it's okay with y'all, we'll just take it kind of item by item. There's 3 or 4 small revisions that I'm proposing in this ordinance. We will start with the elevation for mobile homes. So up until September of, I apologize. We have a public speaker. He would like to speak. Let's see, Mr. Kent Shake Snyder.
How you guys and ladies doing? Pleasure to have an opportunity to be here tonight, and appreciate the job you guys are doing. It was brought to my attention that one of the items, and correct me if I'm wrong, that y'all were gonna look at tonight would be to reduce the elevation of trailers from 2 foot above base flood elevation to 1 foot. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, to the bottom of the I-beam. Yes, sir.
Yes, and I'm just coming here strictly from the experiences I've had. I do own an elevation company. I was also part of the council for a number of years, and we do work in about 15 parishes. So I've got a background to see the actual things that actually happen in the field, and as opposed to, what a lot of people say this and say that. Regardless of what happens, it's an inconvenience to do any type of elevation of your home, is to get it up above whatever elevation your land is. It's costly. It's an inconvenience. Sometimes it doesn't look like you want it to be. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't do this and you flood, there's nothing that can compare with that, and as many of you guys experienced. Some of the things that some people may know, we've had a number of people that were 1 foot above base flood elevation, and base flood elevation is the best guesstimate the Corps could come up with in the parish past. Some people that were a foot above did flood. And if you have a trailer and it hits in the bottom of your trailer and gets into the insulation, it's gone. And it's very, very expensive to repair. The other thing, if you do flood, after you meet the parish requirement of 1 foot above, even if you have flood insurance, it disqualifies you from the $30,000 you can mitigate with ICC funding, because you've already met the parish requirement. So you don't do that. You're not allowed to get that. And the other thing is, if you're not 2 feet above, in which we probably had 20 people call us requesting to get elevated above because they didn't meet the restore requirement. So a lot of these federal and state programs require you to do that, and I can't tell you how many of them are 5, 6 inches below, and they can't go back and get their $20,000 or $30,000 that's owed to them by restore because they didn't meet the requirement. So just to bring you what is actually happening there, really please, anytime you want to find out something, give us a call or anybody else, but there's a lot of repercussion for lowering this amount. And so just something to think about. And there's many other things also. Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Mr. J. Snyder. Let's see, so that's a good place to start with the bottom of the I-beam. So until September 2019, the bottom of the I-beam of a mobile home had to be set at base flood elevation. And in the revised fill ordinance, September of 2019, we moved the bottom of that I-beam to base flood elevation +2. So we essentially moved the mobile homes 2 foot higher in the air, and while moving all other homes only 1 foot. And that is in my experience that I do have a personal property that's a mobile home, and that was set in 2015 on Highway 22, and the bottom of that I-beam was set at 8 foot, which is base flood elevation for that area, and it's got a very large 16-inch I-beam underneath it, and it goes up roughly 13, 14 inches before anything, insulation, electrical, all that stuff starts underneath it, and it made it survived the flood we had that year. And personally, it's become kind of a hardship on a lot of people who have been reaching out that the cost to elevate this mobile home, in some instances, the bottom of that I-beam is 6 feet in the air, and the extra cost that it costs for mobile home movers because I believe over 50 or 52 inches, at that point you got roughly 4 times the cinder blocks you got to put underneath there. They're more together. It costs, instead of a couple $1,000, it could cost upwards of $5,000 or $6,000. And so I was proposing to move the bottom of that I-beam to 1 foot at base flood elevation, which in most instances would put the finished floor about 2.5 foot above base flood elevation. This time I entertain any comments on this specific revision.
I did want to address one thing that Mr. Kent Scheck-Snyder mentioned, and the fact that you will lose the ICC funding for $30,000 and won't be eligible for restore. Now, you also bring up a good point where a foot difference can make a big difference in someone whether or not they're going to do the project with the mobile home. I think if we do move forward and we do something in the direction of what you're saying, we need to have something notarized, something where these people understand before they do this and they set this home that they will not be eligible for certain federal and state programs. And I mean, I think that's a risk some will be willing to take because it may be a difference of them being able to afford a home or have to rent,
And that is that's something that the planning department and I spoke about whenever pulling permit for a mobile home, giving them the paperwork and the information and them, acknowledging, whether it be with the signature or something like that, acknowledging that if something were to happen in the future to get that restore money, that mobile home would have to be moved up, or modular home, or home in itself would have to be moved up to the 2 foot above base flood elevation.
And we would suggest that this be recorded so that if somebody goes to buy that mobile home, first guy can check it off, I don't want to do it, but we want to make sure anybody that buys it knows that it may not
In the sale.
qualify for these, so that we can put third parties on notice at a later date.
Right. Any other comment on the mobile home elevation?
Mr. Chair, my
President,
concern
Mr.
is, regardless of the information we provide to the constituent, to the homeowner, you can tell them 100 times, you can put it in writing, you can etch it in gold. Sometimes it doesn't stick. The realization isn't there because what folks are looking at is, how can I save money on the front end? My fear is that if we place an ordinance that gives them the mirage, that it's okay to put it at 1 foot above base level, we could be called upon as being misleading these individuals or misdirecting them. And I can give numerous examples, through my personal practice, of situations where contracts are entered into and one party is slightly more elevated than the other when it comes to the understanding and the comprehension. And so the lesser party will definitely win. In a situation like this, my concern would be next flood, even though someone signed off saying, I perfectly understand that I may lose out on this money, they're still going to be coming back and they're still going to be clamoring. They were misled. They followed our guidelines. They followed what the parish told them they had to do. And so that's why I think we need to set up our guidelines in such a way that will protect the uninformed citizens as well as those who can be informed. And I think that's the only downside I have to it, is my concerns, future events, as far as what could happen. And I listened to what Mr. Scheck-Snyder said regarding the loss of state and federal funds and that threat, that possibility. And that's a concern, for those individuals. We're up here not just to make life easy for our constituents, but to protect them. And I think what was written back in September protects them. It gives them guidance for everything that they need to go forward with through state and federal funding, state and federal acquiescence. And I'd be hesitant to say I'm going to deviate from the feds and the state because I want to make life a little bit easier for some folks. And I'm not trying to demean the cost. I understand the cost, just like we were talking about the cost for the bridges and the cost for the culverts and the cost for the bulkheads. It's something that we have to consider. But in a situation like this, sometimes it's tough to be the mean parent, And I think that's what we almost need to reconsider here, is we have to protect them from making a mistake and misguiding them. And that's just my share with you.
Mr. Robert?
And I do want to clarify, they're still eligible for all of their flood insurance and everything else. This is strictly limiting them to that state or federal money. But, yeah, I mean, so they would absolutely have to sign off on it, be part of the process, be put on the sale, as he's saying. But they will still have their regular, and pay off with their regular flood insurance.
Understand?
My question is, are we going to take these individually, make motions to amend individually? Is that your desire, sir?
What I was gonna do was go through them, let's discuss. And then, after we go through all of them, I would entertain a motion, to approve all of them, or, amended motion, substitute motion on.
Might be less complicated to do them one at a time, from what I'm hearing.
Right, okay,
If-
yeah,
it
that's
would
fine,
just
we
be
can do
my
that.
suggestion
If that's,
To do them one at a time rather than start amending motions, that's kind of harder to keep
Okay.
track of.
I do have one question. Do you have, any comment on this one specifically?
My only concern is certainly, there was a lot of effort and work went into the fill ordinance last year, and the effort was to keep people out of the water. That was the whole goal. What do we do to protect our constituents, especially the most vulnerable of our constituents? Which, I get that it's costly, and that those who are maybe buying a mobile home are less able to buy homes, or might be waiting to buy a home. So I respect that. I lived in a mobile home for many years before I had my first house, and so I fully understand. But I was also more vulnerable then to the cost associated with flooding. And had I flooded, I'd have had less money to recover. So jeopardizing their ability to recover is also a concern of mine. And once I sold that mobile home, did it become someone else's problem? So for me to support this change, it would have to notify, as Mr. Parrington suggested, it would have to be recorded. And there would have to be some notarized documents that we advised you that this should be 2 foot above flood. Otherwise, I'm going to have to stay with 2 feet above. So I'll see how everybody else is feeling.
So someone from the planning, maybe you, Mr. Drone. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Yeah, I did a lot of elevations in my time in the private sector, and so I just wanted to kind of give 2 sides of this particular issue. So, state requirement is I-beam at base. That is the current state requirement. When you put a mobile home at +2, it then throws the floor even 18-inch higher than that. Now, so what you're talking about is what we consider, in a way, machinery, the wiring and air ducts between the bottom of the I-beam and the floor of the mobile home is what we're referring to. And so that's what you're looking to protect, okay? In 2016, in the flood, we call the Great Flood, which is happened once in my lifetime. I have never seen water that, and probably since 1929 have we seen a flood of that magnitude when the levees broke. I would be interested to know what are the surrounding parishes around us, what their regulations as it pertains to mobile homes only. What are they requiring? I know, and I have a feeling that we are one of the most restrictive parishes in the southern region when it comes to elevation. I know from our immediate neighbors that we are, because I've done elevation. So we're one of the most restrictive at this point. So I would be curious on what some of our neighbors do as far as regulating mobile homes, because when you're not throwing the floor, you're throwing at 18 above +2. which is an incredible height. So the other side of that is the construction and safety concerns with being so high, because at that point, you're talking about wind load. And so you have to gauge on exactly, and Santa Ma is one of those areas where you go by and you'll see, or even Galvez for that matter, on the eastern part of our parish, where you'll see trailers 6, 7 foot high. I mean, that has a serious danger to it. Now, does a foot matter? I'm not sure. Okay, I would have to have an engineer explain the wind load capacity being the difference between the two. So I can't answer that. If you qualifying for federal funding, we would, most times you were going for restore, you've already flooded, and that's the point that you're raising your home. And so, new mobile homes that would be +1 wouldn't necessarily unless they flooded. So you look at inundation levels at 2016 flood, they were right at, in Santa Ma area, base flood 8, they were right at 9. And so this would have been at the bottom of I-beams and other homes that we had done elevations for, and we checked them, and they didn't flood. The waters were right at their doorsteps and so on and so forth. So it doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to give you the difference of the requirement of height versus wind load and safety as versus being a foot down. And like I said, I don't have the data to explain that difference of that safety concern. I just know that it requires additional strapping, it requires different materials, and that's the reason for the extra cost. So there may be a safety issue there, but that's the only one thing. And also, if you decide on 1 foot, you have to decide about the AC unit, the machinery part. I'm assuming you would require it just as a home, it would be +2. So you need to have, if you're going to make an adjustment, make sure the machinery is noted in that adjustment, so you know that it also has to be a 2 foot. That's all.
Ms. Strong, whenever we construct our houses in the parish on pylons and piers, that the BFE +2, that's to the finished floor of the house, or is that also to the bottom of the cap beam?
If it's pier and beam construction, it's the finished floor.
It's the finished floor. So the insulation, anything mechanical is also between base flood and base flood
Right.
+2 as well.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Good point.
All right.
And I guess being boots on the ground or in the water, you know, and I appreciate everyone that was trying to help and save, you know, people that were in these trailers and stuff. But let's face it, when they come in to get people, when they're coming in with boats and these heavy equipment, that it creates a foot wake, and you have water splattering in homes, splattering in trailers. And I'm gonna have to stay with the 2 foot too. And it's just, if we start piecemealing this and going away from what we have been told, and I was one of the ones with the 1 foot in the beginning. But as I see it now, I think we need to leave it standard and say, you know, let's leave it 2 foot above BFE, and then, you know, leave it from there, because you get water levels at that high, and like I said, people are going through with boats and different things. It's gonna create wakes that's gonna be a foot or better, so it's gonna get it if we lower this at 1 foot, is what I'm getting
So
at.
the
And
homes-
Think of that.
I'm telling you, it's.
Good point, didn't think of that.
And it's gonna happen. We're gonna have another flood. It's just something that's gonna happen throughout our time. You're gonna see it in your 4-year term here. But I hate to say it, it's just, we might want to just stick with what we have proposed here. And I know it's gonna be a serious inconvenience, but I mean, you know, getting that high is scary, and it's hard to believe. We was getting people out, you know, when you got people that getting out of that trailer, and you tell them there's 8 and 10 foot of water below them, you know, it's unbelievable, so. That's where I'm gonna stay with it, and this is just, I'm gonna stay with the 2 foot above BFE.
Mr. Robert?
My question to that, or my comment to that is, what about the homes? Because once again, we're going back to, this is on the bottom of the I-beam, not the finished floor. So all of these wakes and all of the boats and everything you're speaking of are flooding the homes right next door to the mobile home. Once again, I think it puts back to the question of, are we making this a parish where we're saying, no, don't bring a mobile home, it's not making it feasible to it? Or, we will kind of look around and check out the restrictions. Do the restrictions outweigh the benefit? I don't know. I think that we're going to have to take a look at a lot of the aspects of the field ordinance. I think it's a good start, but this is how we're going to have to do it. And I mean, what are we saying to potential residents and residents? Are we saying no? I mean, we're going to make people in mobile homes have to do everything a foot higher?
Yes, Ms. Cavalani?
Just a quick question, back to a comment I think you made, Mr. President. It might not be a bad idea to see what surrounding parishes are doing in this regard. I think it whether we agree with it or not, but we may see where a majority of them are addressing it one way. And that might make it a little bit easier to
Yeah, I do know Livingston is BFE, is there,
straightforward.
just straight BFE.
I certainly don't want to consider Livingston, as they have just lost their, or about to lose their flood insurance privileges. That is not the standard that we need to be ascribing to. But certainly, I would consider others.
Chairman?
The
Oh,
president.
go ahead.
And thinking about other parishes, Mr. Scheck-Snyder's here, who lifted mobile homes and camps in Grand Isle. So, not thinking about that as we're talking here, but obviously, mobile homes are lifted in other parts of the parish, especially around the coast, are lifted that high. Now, they require special requirements. And so, I mean, that's to be considered. It's done. I mean, it's done in other parishes, so that's, to say that it can't be done is just a cost factor to it. So it may be that we have to take a look at our code and talk with permitting about maybe requiring additional structure like in the coastal zone, and look at some of the things that they require in the coastal zone, since they're going to be so high, and protect from that wind load. So something to look at in some of our parishes along the coast.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I had been thinking that I might do this, and since you referred to Mr. Scheck-Snyder, I consider him a subject matter expert. So would you mind if we asked, or Kent, would you mind coming up to the podium and tell us what you know about surrounding parishes? I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you don't know, just please say so. But if anybody knows, you likely do.
Number one, I was very proud of the fact that Ascension Parish has stepped up and did something that's not easy. It's very, very hard. Very hard to look people that in the eye that you've known all your life and tell them something that they really don't want to know is going to cost them some money. They know, but you find out through research that it's going to be better for the general public. And one of the things about the mobile homes, by definition, it is a mobile home. And it was mentioned about, well, the houses do not measure from the lowest horizontal member. Houses are measured from the lowest horizontal member in a fast-moving area in a V zone, which most of Ascension Parish does not have. But if you were in the flood, this last flood, and you find out how fast that water was flowing, it's the equivalent of a V zone. And the mobile homes do not have to meet the strong standards that we have in building a foundation. If you build a house nowadays, you found out your foundation costs a large percentage of the value of your house. And there's a reason for that. We found out that the way we were doing the foundation before did not work, did not protect the people. And so we've made strides to do that. I griped and everything every time something was added to us as a contractor. And then as I started doing it, I started realizing this is a good thing. It's costing me more, and I've got to approach the people, but it is something that people will learn to adapt and do it right. What we fail to realize in a mobile home, because it's a mobile home, they don't meet those requirements for the type of foundation. They're on a portable foundation. A lot of them have the little plastic pads on alluvial soil, which we have in this parish, and it's up on blocks that are not filled, and it's not tied down to concrete footers. And so therefore, it's trapped, and everybody does a great job of trying to install the trailers and strap them down and everything, and when done properly, it's pretty good, except that over time, these strappings, go check all the strappings, they become very loose. And so now, let's just say we don't get the water all the way up. We get the water up to that beam, and it's flowing fast, and your straps are loose, and you don't have concrete in your pillars, because we're using our mobile homes now as a permanent home. And so therefore, and then we find out it's a hurricane, it's not something else. So we have 80-mile-an-hour winds, we have water flushing under your house, and it's going back and forth. It's just something that, and that is the reason why they bring the mobile homes a little bit higher, because you don't want the water rushing into a long, narrow structure that the water is hitting up against. And so they try to avoid that. And so, you know, it's a safety reason and everything. And
What about a house that's off the ground? Do they go to the bottom of the beam on the bottom, or do
no,
they go to the floor?
unless it's a VE zone, they go to that. But what I was saying, the
So what you're
safety
talking about
factor,
is in a VE zone?
yeah, unless it's in a VE zone, a velocity zone. Which
Yeah,
is,
so what you were talking about, all the restrictions on the foundation and whatnot, is for a VE zone? Or for?
no,
our zone?
on the housing restriction, the foundation for houses are much more stringent. So therefore, if the water goes up against your house, it's not going to topple your house over. You're not going to be in that type of danger with the modern foundations, as much so.
Well, no, and I
I mean,
understand
nobody's
that,
guaranteeing
but yeah,
anything.
but that's in a different zone.
Yeah, and so, but if you are in a mobile home, you know, there are dangers of that as it scours out. So it's just the realities, and I do them all, so it doesn't really matter to me as a business person, but it's hard to go into a person's home after they flood out, and I've got a lot of relatives in Sanibel, and it hit home very, very much so. And so the best thing we can do for everyone else is the hard decisions that we've already made. And also, one of the things I found out that I was really, just also not a shock, but base flood elevation is a guess. We don't know if it's right. And so you're guessing onto how far off it is. And that flood that happened the last time, it may be totally different this next time. We may get 15 inches of rain, but the winds are from the south, and we had a little storm, and it blows it in from the south. And so that's affected more in different areas. And you may have ditches that are stopped up. And so we can't say that, well, I didn't flood in 2016, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I'm just 1 foot above it. You know, it's sort of like saying I didn't flood in '83. And it's going to happen again. It's just a matter of time. We're seeing it everywhere. So,
Thank you, Mr. Kent. We appreciate it.
thank you.
All right, at this time, Chair would entertain motion or not?
My motion would be that we leave the trailers at BFE +2. But
Second?
I don't think there's a need for that. I mean, technically,
Right.
we can just move on to the next one. There's not going to be a motion
Right,
relative to that.
yeah, if there's no motion, then it would
It's
stay
not
as is.
necessary.
All right, we will move on to the next red item on page 8. Look, and so what this is basically just a clarification. And it's in 2 or 3 different sections. So the fill ordinance, you know, it reads that you got your 36-inch fill, and above 36 inches, at that point, you must explore chain wall and/or pier construction. Well, issue that we were running into is that there was no definition for chain wall. There was no, you know, does a chain wall have to be hollow? Can it be filled? How tall vertically could you go? And so we got together and we talked about, and I think a agreement upon most parties was that we would set a max 24-inch chain wall on top of their 3-foot pad. So we're sticking with our 3-foot, that sloping, nothing changes there. And with this option right here, we would give the people the option, with this change, we would give people the option to achieve going up 5 foot in elevation and still having a concrete foundation on their house without having that 5-foot dirt pad, all the sloping around it. And so that is the change here. So it appears here, and then I want to say on the second or last page of the ordinance, all we did was just put a definition to chain wall. It wasn't defined. So it does state that chain wall can be backfilled with sand. It doesn't have to be hollow. So that's what this proposed change is about. So Chair will take comments.
The definition, excuse me, Mr. Chair, the definition says, concrete wall that is used to connect the foundation of a building to its structure. 2, concrete footings with masonry walls that rise above grade to provide a raised pad for the placement of a building slab. Where did we get that definition from?
Our head building official, Mr. Darren Duplessis.
Good evening. So this definition here, if you look in, there's a FEMA document, and they have a definition of chain wall. It's actually called a stem wall, and I presented that as well at the last meeting. But that's where that definition had come from, a FEMA document, and also the LSU Ag Center had a similar one. That's where that second part kind of originated from. It was a little more in-depth, but we kind of simplified it to where the general public could distinguish what we were trying to put there.
Is this, does this allow for, this definition, does it allow for fill?
Yeah, so if you see where it says rise above grade to provide a raised pad, that pad, chain wall, you have to backfill inside of those blocks. It's not hollow.
Inside of the blocks themselves or
Inside
inside
of
of
that
the?
wall.
Inside of the square rectangle?
They're
Correct.
using river silt to put in, the ones in Sorrento that I seen built.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
They place the concrete walls and then backfill it with the river silt inside
Right.
of it. And they have to
Compacting that?
compact it every 12 inches, just like the ordinance requires for fill.
Compacting that, and then, so now what we're doing is we're taking the 36 inches that I think is in the current ordinance, and we're allowing folks to put another 2 foot of soil,
Correct.
just that it's gonna be walled off.
That's how it's, the proposal's written.
Okay.
And you're going to eliminate a lot of the backfill that would be needed without having that chain wall. You don't have to build up and have the slope coming down, which, I mean, once you go so high, you're going so high anyway. You know,
And
Is
then-
this more of a cost measure, or is it a safety measure? Which way does it benefit?
It's
It's basically how you look at it, you know. If it's someone that's adamant on getting a slab foundation, of course, that cost is gonna be minimal to them. If you got somebody that it doesn't really matter, then,
And the-
but it is gonna increase the cost rather than the other options, pier and beam, conventional slab. Those areas, this would basically be in those areas where building on the slabs, as the ordinance is written now, you can't achieve it with the max 36 inches of fill.
Chairman, I think the other thing with this, there's really nothing you can do with it. From the ones I mean, there's nothing in it, so they just fill it in, and it's not any use for any space or like you can park anything under it, so it's really wasted space, so.
It's basically, yeah, like Mr. Ogeron mentioned, it's just the pad with the block around it.
Right.
And also, you gotta realize all the footings that are in that 3 foot below, those blocks have to continue everywhere there's a load-bearing wall. So it's not just the 4 walls around the outside, it's all the load-bearing
Right.
points. So you're talking about another 2 foot throughout.
it's basically just mitigating the change and being able to build a home like that in that area and having less of an impact. Obviously, people would still have to go through the process and make sure that the engineering and make sure all of it came out correctly, but if you're gonna have the same or less impacts doing that,
Well, yeah, because I'm assuming, like Mr. Jerome said, it's got to be mitigated, the fill inside of there, just like the 3 foot below the chain wall.
So I'm happy to make a motion, if the chair would entertain one, that we accept this change as
Yeah.
recommended.
a second.
All right, we have a motion by Chairwoman Casso, second by Mr. Joel Robert. Are we voting on the thing, or?
Yeah, you'll vote on that one. Any-
No, on our little buttons.
I don't know.
I didn't know. Would you rather me just take roll call?
No, you don't.
Okay,
She's got it.
okay,
I got it.
all right. Any opposition? No? Okay, motion passed. I apologize, I thought we were gonna use the, our little voting buttons.
And I never think about those because mine rarely works.
Okay, the last proposed revision I have, is, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through my document here. It is to increase, so currently, our developments only have to have compaction tests done on 10% of the home sites in that development. So if there's 200 homes in there, only 20 house pads have to have the compaction test. And we're proposing to increase that to 25%, from 10% to 25%.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
We got a motion by Mr. Cagnolati,
Second.
second by Mr. Robert.
I have a question on,
Okay, Mr. Ogeron, comment?
thank you. What's the purpose of increasing this from 10% to 25%?
So in my personal feelings, I feel that whenever a developer builds 100 houses, we don't have to go too extreme, or 60 houses. 6 out of 60 having that compaction test, I feel like we're leaving 54 homeowners open to pour a foundation in the next, 10, 15 years. It just makes them be a little more responsible with their compaction tests. Especially here, I know in the last few years we've had issues with these house pads washing out in the nearby ponds. I don't know, I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to say this is going to help, but I feel like it can't hurt. And as a homeowner, we have to do every foot for every pad. We don't, if you have a house pad and a shop pad, you have to do every foot on both. But the developers only have to do 1 out of 4.
And, I mean, especially when you're doing larger developments, you don't know which your ground is under. I mean, one part, it might be hard clay, you might go a little further and you have blackjack. With that point made, if someone buys a house in the parish and it happened to be on that blackjack where they didn't test, I mean, if your foundation's done, that house is gonna have problems from day one till the end. I'd like to see the number higher than 25, but I'm good with 25 for now.
Mr. President.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chair, if you don't mind, can we get comment from the permitting department, planning department? about
absolutely.
Specifically, exactly what we're talking about here. Each individual home should require its compaction. I think we're talking about an elongated pad that's built between roads and that part, but allow the planning commission to comment.
Well, basically, you've got 10% of the lots in the subdivision that have to be tested for compaction. If any one of those fails, they got to go up to 25%. If any of those fails, then the parish engineer can determine which lots above 25% that can be tested or have to be tested. If any one of those fails, then 100% of the lots in the subdivision have to be tested. Now, you can go through this one or two ways. You can say, all right, we've got a certain percentage that we test right now. We haven't had an avalanche of people. There may have been isolated incidents or something like that where somebody might have had a problem with their foundation or something like that, and you increase it 15%, that lessens the likelihood that something like that could possibly happen in the future. The other option would be for you to have them test minimally during construction and infrastructure construction on the pads and everything, and then when the homeowner comes in or the builder comes in to get his permit, you tell him he's got to get a compaction test on every lot in the subdivision. I mean, if you really want to protect the homeowners, you can require them to do that too. So, I mean, that's another option.
Everybody else has to get one.
Yeah, I mean, that's an option that's open to you.
I mean, it's
instead of
something
just
that you don't
saying
wanna
10 or
play around with.
25%, you could say, well, come in here, you gotta get a compaction test on every lot before you get a building permit.
Any comments, Mr. Jerome?
I wanted to add that, when we had this discussion, I'd say within, since my tenure here at least, we haven't had anybody complain about a cracked foundation or anything like that. So I think, maybe a good compromise is to go with the 25% that you suggested initially. If we see some problems down the road, we can come back. But, in all the projects that we've looked at, both individual lots as well as subdivisions, we have not had any complaints at all about cracked foundations, since I've been here at least. And I don't know about
Mr. Chair.
anybody else.
Mr. Dempsey?
And Jerome, when they bring the lifts up, are they testing? When they putting in the retention and different things, are they getting a compaction test in?
On the retention for,
Because they're using the lot for the lots, the dirt for the lots.
Right.
So are they, when are you calling for testing?
we're getting,
They can call them for testing on each lift, but I mean, they choose the 10% of the lots that they test. So it may be near the detention pond.
it's not
Yeah,
random?
if they-
or
It's
it
not
may
random?
be.
They choose the 10 they test?
Yeah.
If they're putting 60 homes on 20
I'm gonna
acres,
make sure I do really good on the
every
ones that
12
test it.
inches,
I'm just saying.
every 12 inches that they bring up, that land, that is 60 lots, they'll just pick 6 lots for every foot, correct?
Yeah, they gotta do a test for every 12-inch lift. And I mean, the testing lab goes out there, and as they're doing the work and they're doing their lifts, the testing agent basically randomly picks spots that are evenly spaced throughout the development and earthwork that they're conducting to do the test.
Well, right before that, you did say that the developer picks the spots that they test, right?
Well, I mean, it may not be the developer, it may be the testing lab, because the developer's not sitting out there. You've got a guy that's moving earth out there that's working for the developer, and the testing agent is out there to do the testing on the
That's
pads and
something-
the lifts.
yeah, That's something that I want to make sure is that needs to be random, and the developer doesn't need to decide which ones they're testing, because, that kind of defeats the purpose.
yeah, to note that the testing lab is different and apart from the people bringing in the dirt.
So the landowner does not know which ones are going to be tested?
Well, like Eric said, that they're doing it at random, right? So they'll do random tests throughout the subdivision at the discretion of the testing agency, not the developer.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Mr. Jerome, you did indicate earlier that in your time with the parish, you've not had an issue with,
Well,
The
we
cor-
haven't seen any come through in, in my 3.5 years, so.
Sure.
Whether that's a strong or long enough time, I'm not sure, but, in my time period, that hasn't occurred.
so if we have a process in place, these developers are doing the compaction studies as required currently, we're not having any issues, but we still want to increase their costs to develop this property by 150%. Is
I
there
don't-
any other reasoning behind that?
I don't
other
agree
than-
with not other issues. There's been issues to my attention, and
Well,
like I said,
again, but I'm talking to the individuals from the administration who are not aware of any. Why are we trying to penalize these new homeowners with these added costs for these tests if thus far we're showing that there's no problem? There's no issues related to the current rules? Is it just we want to change rules, or is there a legitimate reason behind it? Are we getting any examples, any case law, any cases, any situations where we're saying people's lives are in danger, people's homes are in danger, we need to act accordingly? Or are we just saying 10's not big enough, let's jack it up to 25%?
I make a motion to raise it to 25%, to where the developments on the new developers have to test a minimum of 25% of the homes.
Were you
I'm
finished?
done,
All right, we have a motion to accept the 25% change. Is there a second?
Discussion.
Discussion?
I wasn't aware that what Eric brought to light about when it fails, then they automatically bump it up. You said 15 or is it 25%?
And they test 10%, and if you get a failure, they go up to 25. If one of those 25 fails, then the parish engineer gets to choose a percentage and pick the lots that they test. And if any of those test, then they're required to test 100% of the lots in the
Okay,
development.
with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my original motion to approve it to 25%, because I think the fail-safes are there if they find problems. And there's been no issue, according to Mr. Fournier.
All right, we do have a motion from Mr. Robert.
And I did want to clarify, so the 10%, the developer does not know which 10 they're going to test.
No, I mean, the developers are not out there. You've got the guy on the dozer moving the dirt work, and the testing agency goes out there at random and tests over the development every 12-inch left.
Is it appropriate for chair to second?
Yeah, but I mean, we're not going to get a vote.
Typically not.
Okay. I just
Your
want.
motion just dies for a lack
Yeah.
of second.
Okay, motion dies for a lack of second. And pretty much on the same subject, increasing the compaction test on commercial construction. Basically moved each compaction test up roughly for every 2,500 square feet, added a compaction test.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yep.
The reason that this was added to the changes is that the 12-inch per 1,000 square feet test per lift from the individual homes was placed in the commercial lot section whenever the ordinance was written originally. And I've had several discussions with engineers that are working for commercial developers, and which is something that I hadn't thought about. But if you can imagine having it's fine if you've got a 2,000-3,000 square foot office building, but what if you got a 100,000 square foot warehouse or 250,000 square foot warehouse? Then you've got to have 250 tests every foot. And if you're going up 2 tests, the cost of that will be astronomical. So basically what this is, and the change in the ordinance, is to give it on a graduated scale depending on the overall size of the building pad and what they're doing. They're still going to have an even number of basically what they would on an average size, but it changes based on the increase in size of the footing and the foundation for the structure.
I'll make the motion to approve that change.
Okay. We have a motion from Chairwoman Casso,
Second.
second from Councilman Cagnolati. Any opposition? All right, motion passes. And that's it. At this point, Chair would entertain motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second.